Hello, everyone. Hopefully you're tuning in. We're doing this live broadcast talking about drum recording. On these live things, people don't usually join for the first sort of chunk of time, so I'm just going to sort of sit here and and chat to myself for a short while. I think we are going to, for the early adopters, let's see if anyone wants to come and join us on the chat. Now, if you're watching this live, I would ask that you try to keep your mics muted, unless you want to say something. Otherwise, the video screen will keep flipping in and out. So I'm just going to broadcast this info on Facebook for you Facebook types. And Dan, are you able to send this link on the group as well? Brilliant. So today we are talking about drum recording. Oh no, I think that link is actually wanting you to log into Google. So you folks who are not Google members will have to go and see this on YouTube. Right. Okay, cool. Should we kick it off anyway and start sort of going through these points and talk about why we're here today and such like. So Dan, do you want to tell us a bit about what we're doing today?
Yes. Sorry, I was just trying to get the Facebook thing up and ready. Yeah, we are talking about drum recording. Kind of as a little bit of a precursor to our course that me and Russell are running on the 30th of September. We thought we would invite people to a little bit of a group chat to kind of discuss some of the elements when it comes to recording drums. So I'm currently sat in my mix room here in Orchard Studios in Cheshire. I've even got a drum kit, a very little drum kit in my mix room, so everyone can see that. But we're talking about drums. And that's really what we're talking about. We're going to kind of focus on two areas. We're going to talk about room mics and close mics, and which and the pros and cons of each of those. And we're also going to look at getting the best sound from the point of view of the drum kit itself. So that's kind of the two areas that we are kind of starting with. Let me just very quickly hand over back to Russ, and I'll just try and get the Facebook link up and working.
Awesome. So yeah, we're running a course on the 30th of September. And we're going to be spending the day playing with drums, playing with microphones. We've been very kindly supported by Aston Microphones, Impression Cymbals and Percussion Plus. And yeah, it's going to be great. So hopefully a load of you guys, well, we've got limited places actually. We'll tell you more about that later. But hopefully some of you guys will pop along to the live seminar. If you can't make it, you're not in the UK or you're not in the north of England or whatever, then we're going to just give you a little bit of a taster of some of the things that we're going to be talking about today. So when you mic up drums for a recording, I always like to think of three different sort of areas of drum microphones: spot microphones, overheads, and room microphones. So we're just going to talk a little bit about each individual type of mic. So spot microphones. Now, whilst the spot microphone can range from an inch away from the drum skin to say 6 inches away from the drum skin, and that can give you a very different type of sound. So there are a few things that we kind of need to keep in mind when we are looking at looking at our spot microphones and making choices as to which ones to use. So let me just bring up my little crib sheet here of what we're going to talk about. Okay, so this one came from Dan, actually. We were chatting about this earlier on. And the most important thing with spot microphones is physical damage.
Yeah, it's us drummers getting too loud, getting too carried away and hitting it. Really, well, it's partly that, and it's also partly is the microphone actually in the way of you being able to play. If you've got kind of a mic that's right where you want to strike the drum, then obviously you're going to get into a problem. It's kind of obvious, but sometimes I've been to gigs. I know it's not quite recording, but I've been to gigs where I've used a house kit, and there's kind of microphones where you kind of want to play the drum, and it sort of gets in the way, and it makes a horrible noise across the PA system, which is not good. Or when you're recording, of course, it's not very good either.
We used to get the when I was doing live work with the little AKG Bugs. I forget the model name. Does anyone know the model name of that? The AKG Bug clip-on microphones that sounded so good for their size. If you know, tell us in the comments. I don't know whether that'll be on YouTube or here. There was these tiny little clip-on microphones, and drummers would always, for some reason, they'd always hit them. And these things, they were expensive as well. They were like a couple of £100 each. They would just explode. So the way to stop that happening is, well, you couldn't stop them exploding, but you could stop the parts flying off in multiple directions by putting a wind or pop shield kind of foam covering over these microphones. And the amount of those little bug microphones that were rescued like that was just phenomenal. Someone's beeping at us. Who's beeping at us? Okay, amount of those little cool. So yeah, are you still there, Dan?
Hey, I am. Yes.
Excellent. So that was your top tip for studio mic.
Yes.
Keep them out of the way of the drummer. So if we move on to number 2, proximity effect. Proximity effect is basically increased bass frequency response when you move the microphone to within a certain range, a certain distance of the source. So you can, if you utilize certain microphones in certain ways, you can push them closer, and the amount of low end will artificially jump up once you reach a sort of a certain threshold. It's usually about sort of 4 to 6 inches. So proximity effect is always something that I try to keep in mind and utilize when I'm, working on drum recordings and so on. Any experiences on that, Dan? Oh no, you're silent.
Wrong button. There you go. I think one of the things to consider, which might come up potentially a few times in this, is that you kind of always, or certainly when I started engineering, I always wanted to get the biggest, fattest drum sound that I possibly could, which is great on certain records and for certain sounds. But sometimes if you get too much proximity effect, you might think, oh, that makes the tom sound really boomy and bassy and brill. But it might actually not necessarily be what you want when you come to mix it.
Too much bass.
You might have too much bass. So I think it's always, don't always assume that the biggest, fattest sound is the sound that you want, because it might well be that it actually is counterproductive when you come to put the drums in with the rest of the instruments, depending on what genre that you're working on.
That's very much a thing which people can pick up with experience. Unfortunately, obviously, tonight we're just kind of sitting in our control rooms, nattering away. We have just gone live on Facebook as well. So any of you folks on Facebook, if you want to join just follow my page and join the... a lot of joining on Facebook. Come and join the Google Hangout. The link is on my page. You'll have to be... a lot of joining on Facebook. And hopefully we'll have some more folks more folks on here. But yeah, we're live on Facebook as well. Hello, Facebook. Cool. So just to recap for Facebook, we are talking about some of the cool things that we're going to be going over in our Recording Studio Masterclass drum recording on the 30th. But obviously not everyone can make it to that. More information on that later. So we're just sort of discussing some kind of drum thoughts and hanging out tonight and, you know, nattering. So we've discussed physical damage. Well, we've discussed the 3 positions that you can put mics in: spot mics, which is close to the drum, overheads, and room mics. So we started off on spot mics. Physical damage can be caused by getting your spot mic in the wrong position and the drummer hitting it with a drumstick, and it happens all.
You mean putting it in the way of the drummer? I should speak. I should fess up that I am a drummer as well as an engineer. So
Yeah.
you know, it's when the engineer puts it in our way that
So
it
the
causes a problem.
guys on Facebook can't actually see this. See Dan responding here. They can probably hear you though. So I'm just going to share the link to the live stream as well on YouTube. Anyone there on Facebook enjoying this? No. Cool. Come join us over on YouTube or the Google Hangouts link, which is just below. Right. Okay. So what's up next on our list? Do you want to take separation?
Yeah, I think so. When the drum kit is one of the hardest instruments to kind of record because it is essentially a lot of instruments put together. And so obviously if you're recording a band all together, a separation between the instruments, as in the guitarist and the singer and the bass player and the drummer. But obviously when you record a drum kit, then each individual drum is an instrument in its own right. And I think this also kind of goes back to the how close you want to get your microphone. And it's a bit of a toss-up between, is the microphone going to A, be in the way? B, is it going to get up potentially too much bass? But also, if you pull the microphone away, then you are going to start to get some spill or more spill from the other instruments, from the other drums. And so therefore you kind of lose some of that separation that you want. Having said that, if you get kind of a nicely balanced kit, does it matter too much if there's a little bit of bleed from one drum to another? Potentially not. If there's kind of too much, then obviously that's something that you need to consider.
It's very much a genre dependent thing, isn't it, really? And having the sort of experience to know what is tasteful in one genre versus what is tasteful in another is quite a tricky thing, really. So you know, that's something that hey, can you mute your microphone, please, Frank? There we go. That's better. So just a reminder, folks, if you're joining us on the if you're joining us on here live, just keep your mics muted when you come on until you want to say something. Right, awesome. So yeah, I think separation is quite an interesting thing, because when I'm mixing metal records or sort of like kind of, you know, 80s kind of vibes where you want that kind of drum machiney sound, you know, you go in and you manually edit the toms, you cut out all the spill, you know, you try and make these things as separate as possible. And I mix those recordings really wide, so, you know, like you'll have a tom fill and it'll come right across the stereo spectrum. Smearing from, which is quite interesting actually, because you can have like a high tom over here and a low tom over here, and they can actually physically be next to each other, but we pan them out a little bit further than expected. And obviously, you know, spill creates smearing, so we are less able to pan them because, you know, they're interfering with each other. Sorry about my autofocus camera here, it's going crazy, but
It's just showing the smearing effect.
the smearing effect. Yeah, that's it. So I mean, with spot mics, you do get much better separation. And in the course, we're going to be sort of going through various different spot mic configurations. My favorite ones that I've used everywhere from, big studios to bedroom studios, and the principles are much the same. Now, we can't go into the full detail of all the concepts, but that's going to have to wait till the seminar on the 30th. But yeah, so that separation, it's always a cool thing that you can, if you have a very separated sound, if you got really close mics, that you can then repair drum hits, for instance, by applying quite severe EQ. You won't have that EQ applied to as much of the spill, essentially. And we're thinking about signal to noise ratio, really, aren't we? I did a blog on this a little while back where I was talking about every time you half the distance between your microphone and your sound source, your signal to noise ratio, I think it quarters. Don't don't quote me on that. Go and check out the blog on russellcottier.com /blog. But it's quite an interesting thing. I mean, it does really give you an insight into how mic position is so important in spill rejection. But yeah, cool. Anything else to say on separation, Dan?
I think we might kind of talk about this when we talk about rooms and overheads. But if you are, I've done a few kind of jazzy records where I haven't used spot mics so much, but when I have used them, the spill, I kind of, because I'm not going to do the whole panning thing if I'm doing a jazz record, that would be weird. And so I don't mind a little bit of spill getting into it if it's if I'm going to use it, as I say, for something like a jazz thing, because you do. I've always come to the. I always approach it that if you mess around with the sound a lot in when you mix it, then you kind of take away a little bit of the realism of it. So if you're having to kind of EQ out a load of spill off stuff, and you're kind of messing with the sound that you do want as much as taking away the sound that you don't want. So it's just something to be careful of, and I think it's worth. When you're setting up a system to record a load of drums, to really don't just listen to the drum that you want to hear. Listen to the drums that you perhaps don't want to hear in there as well. So get the drum to play, even if you may be working on the snare mic to get that right. Get the drum to play a full rhythm and solo the snare mic, and listen to see what else you can hear, and make sure if it's good or not, or if it's something that you think you need to adjust. And polar patterns, of course, which we'll discuss on the 30th, are one of the main ways of reducing some of that spill.
Yes, absolutely. I did all sorts of crazy stuff. I don't think I've got them here now, but I went through a phase of like getting foam and putting it around the snare mic and tubes and all sorts of mad contraptions to try and get my signal to noise ratio more, well, a higher signal to noise ratio, reduce the spill. And I was on this sort of quest, probably around 2005, 2006, where I was really obsessed with having no spill. And ultimately, it's as you grow in experience, I think it's one of those things where you choose to have more or less spill, really. And you realize what you can live with, and you to make a real drum recording, if you're going to record live drums like we're talking about, you've got to expect some spill, haven't you? So you won't have 100% separation, but it's genre dependent and very much dependent on mic positions. So if anyone's on any of the feeds, give us a comment, let us know what you are doing in terms of, we've got a few on Facebook here, not Facebook, we've got a few on the YouTube. Anyone who's still watching on Facebook, jump over to the YouTube link, which is just up above the screen here, and hey, they have and watch the video from there. Give us some comments, tell us what you're doing, how you're recording drums, and what sort of mic setups you're using. You're using ambient mics, using spot mics, and so on. Cool. All righty. Next on the list, we were going to talk about the Sheps no overhead method. Now, Andrew Sheps, who does anyone know who Andrew Sheps is?
Me.
Famous mix engineer, amazing bloke. He did everything from 99 Problems to Michael Jackson records to Adele. And he has this, one of his techniques is to not use overhead mics at all and just use spot mics on the drums, on the actual drum shells, and smash them to hell. I mean, he's talked about this over and over again. Smash them to hell and really, you know, compress them so they're spanky, and he gets all of the room sound out of that signal to noise, well, a low signal to noise ratio, which he achieves by hyper compressing. And it's quite an interesting sound. It's not something I do often myself. I've tried it once or twice, but he's definitely the master of that kind of thing. Could be a way to go, especially if you've got, say, 4 mics and you don't have any decent overhead mics and you're doing some home recording. So maybe that's an option that you want to look at. We'll definitely be trying that one out in the seminar on the 30th. If you can't wait for me to tell you about it at the end, go over to recordingstudiomasterclass.co.uk and sign up for the seminar. It's a live event in Cheshire. Right. At Dan's studio, which is
This one behind. Well, this is my mix room, but yeah, I can't show you the drums because I can't move my computer out to show you. But it's there. It's over there. If you can see where I'm pointing.
Over there, definitely is. Cool. All right, see, what's up next? Well, I have got don't discuss secret mic technique. Well, we're not going to discuss that. We'll save that for another day. Okay, let's move swiftly on because we're approaching 23 minutes, and this was only meant to be half an hour, really. But never mind. Overheads can sound cool, but
right, I'm gonna step in here and say overheads and room mics as well, to be fair, can sound really good because obviously they give you that sense of depth and expansion. But I also teach drums, and in fact I had a student with me. Oh, hello, can you hear me all right? Has everyone got me?
I can hear you. Keep going.
Fantastic, good. Yes, I had a student with me about a couple of hours ago, and I'm always drumming into them. Sorry, pardon the pun. To keep a balanced kit when you play. As in, what I mean is, as a drummer, you need to make sure your bass drum's not too loud, your snare drum's not too loud, your hi-hats aren't too loud, or any of them are kind of out of sync with each other, volume-wise. Because if you've got someone that's kind of smacking out of the hi-hats, but you can barely hear the bass drum, then that means that the overheads and the room mics will also not really hear those drums either. So when you come to throw up the room mics, you'll hear a load of cymbal wash and not really much else. So that is, the overheads and the rooms can be great microphones to use, but your drummer needs to be balanced and to create a balanced sound.
And that is like the number one issue, especially if you're recording younger or less experienced drummers. I shouldn't say younger, I just mean less experienced drummers. If you're recording less experienced drummers, the major issue is them hitting their cymbals too hard, and cymbals are loud. They are really loud.
They're designed to be heard across theaters. They're not quiet instruments.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the whole concept of the rock drum kit. Oh, I found the live chat here. the whole concept of the rock drum kit is, you know, it's come from jazz drums, really. It's come from early show drums. It's come from marching bands, and it's whilst it's totally, you know, very high tech, and there's some awesome companies like Impression Cymbals who are supporting our masterclass, which is coming up. you know, they're really great. You still have to not hit the drums all at the same velocity.
I think it's one of those things. There was a drummer came in. Oh, again, he was a less experienced drummer, and he came in with his band about 5-6 years ago now, and he came in with these massive, great big Zildjian at the time used to do a thing called the Z3, I think, and they were designed to be played at venues, kind of when your kit wasn't mic'd that well, and they were super loud, and of course he's smashing the hell out of them, and I've got no real control over that on my overheads or anything because it's so loud. At the same time, a lot of manufacturers do less loud stuff. I mean, when I play, I'm quite a delicate drummer anyway, and I kind of use jazz-ish cymbals because their volumes are lower. So particularly when I'm recording, you don't get that huge, great wash of cymbals over stuff. But it does not just cymbals. It could be bass drum. You could have someone that's really heavily footed, and again, when you open up your room mics, all you get is this massive thud. You can't really hear the snare drum or anything because you've got this huge, big booming thing going on around. So it's very much dependent on the drummer, I think, on that one.
Yeah. So we're getting some questions coming in, and what I think what we should do is we've got a very, very talented keyboard player joining us. Actually, Mr. Jack Beacall. We should all bow to his.
Hello, Jack.
Jack Beacall. He's the man, Jack. So yeah, questions coming in. We will answer them towards the end. So yeah, I think it is about balance, isn't it? And even picking an appropriate drum set. You know, some people do pick the wrong cymbals and the wrong shells and so on. And I guess that's one of the reasons why Sheps uses his no overheads technique. Right. Okay. So, you know, we keep coming back to this signal to noise ratio, which I talk about a lot. It's one of the key things with drum recording. And we have to think about signal to noise ratio for rooms and overhead mics. And, you know, Dan was just saying, as a very quiet drummer, a soft drummer, I should say, you know, he's been in a situation in recording studios where his drumming's been very delicate, you know, for like an acoustic song or something like that. And the mic pre's may have just not been clean enough. The mics may have been too far away, or the room might have been, you know, not the greatest space. And the engineer has had to crank up their trim, their input level. So essentially what you're doing is you're increasing the internal noise of the electrical noise of the microphone and that whole system, to try and make the drums sound loud enough. So there's two things you can do in those scenarios. You can move the mic closer to the drummer, or you can get the drummer to play louder. I mean, you come across this quite a lot, don't you, Dan?
Yeah, because I am very quiet. Delicate and thoughtful, I think, is the word that I use when I play, something like that. Yeah, I think you kind of touched on it when you said ask the drummer to play louder, and you can get very bogged down in the whole technicalities of all of this. But at the end of the day, you're recording a real person playing a real instrument, and there is something to be said about just asking them to play louder, just kind of a little bit. And it's funny, when I work with more experienced engineers, when I go into a different studio and play for someone, they will say, would you mind playing a little bit louder? Whereas less experienced ones, kind of, because I don't know, as a drummer, if I go to a studio, I go as a drummer, not as an engineer, because that's what I'm being paid to do at that time. And as a drummer, I don't know what's going on I don't know what's going on the other side of the glass. So I can obviously hear my headphone mix, but I can't hear exactly what's going on and what they're recording. So it is kind of up to the engineer to kind of sort of kindly ask, can you play a bit louder? And if I think if it works and it's a two-way process, then by all means. But you got to remember it's a person, and you can ask them things as well as just trying to come up with a technical solution to it all the time.
Well, that's what production is all about, really. And you know, recording is essentially easy. Producing producing or making informed engineering decisions is the tricky bit, isn't it? That's where you get those interpersonal skills and working with the drum, and we'll talk about that in a moment. Cado has just asked about sample reinforcement, which kind of comes into the spot mics thing a bit. We will be talking about that in the session, so I won't go into much detail on that at the minute. I will say again to the Facebook folks, join us on YouTube. The link is above. So yeah, sample reinforcement and gating and so on. There's some cool things you can do with triggers that you put on drum shells to open and close gates of other microphones further down the line and such like. But again, too much to go into on this very limited online.
Tell you what, I will very quickly say about the whole triggering stuff. That is also dependent on because I don't do it a lot when I mix. In fact, I do it hardly ever. And the software that I use Logic when I'm mixing mostly, occasionally Pro Tools as well. And sometimes when you try and get the MIDI to score thing on Logic to go, the more spill you've got, the more difficulty it has working out which is the actual drum you're trying to trigger. So again, making sure you've got a clean recording of your spot mics is quite important.
I always advise, if you have triggers, stick them on the drums as well and take a trigger track. Just record a trigger track, not a MIDI track, literally just the audio out the drum trigger. And it'll just be a series of clicks like this. But you can use them to open a gate or close a gate or trigger samples, all sorts of things. Cool. So on my notes, I've got need a godlike room. When you're using overheads, you need a godlike room. That was a typo. I actually meant a good room. But yeah, I've been fortunate enough to record in some really top spaces. And whilst space is massively important for your overheads and your room mics, you can record an orchestra in a good studio, like a good big London studio with 3 microphones. It can be that simple. But these signal to noise issues and all of those other kind of parameters, they all persist no matter how good or how poor your room is. The theories persist. You need to choose how far in and out your mics are and where they're pointing, and keep good gain structure and so on. But yeah, basically, it is as simple as the further away you move the overheads, the more room you get in there, and you can use that to great effect. So Mark Ronson, for instance, was known for when he was doing the Amy Winehouse kind of records. He's moved on a little bit since then, but he was known very much for using a specific drummer who would use one microphone. Now, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, someone correct me if I'm wrong, a lot of those drums were done up in the Motor Museum in Liverpool, or some of them, I think. And as far as I know, again, correct me if I'm wrong, it was pretty much one mic just out in front of the kit. And in the session that we're going to do on the 30th, we will be covering one mic drum recording. And you know what? I've done some great records with just the one mic on the drum kit. Mostly, when you're helping out a band demo or something, and they say, where do we want to put this? How do we record drums? Well, you can start from as little as one drum mic. I won't give away all the secrets today, but yeah, maybe we'll do a video on that at some point. Definitely be doing some hands-on work on that in the upcoming course. So let me just keep an eye on questions. Cool. Okay. Right. What's next upon our list, Mr. Logan?
Well, we've kind of covered the room mics a little bit, and because time is kind of getting on, so shall we move over to the next major point?
Well, what we haven't covered with rooms and overheads is high pass filtering, and in my drum mixing workflow video I talk about filtering and so on. There's 2 schools of thought on this, the main school and the 80s hair metal school. So the main kind of school of thought, which a lot of us were taught, is remove all the low frequencies that you don't need. So you got a high pass filter, you either engage it or you sweep it up until you feel that the signal starts to lose some content. And that's a general rule for all of your tracks. Um, and basically it reduces the amount of low frequency that you get. All sorts of horrible low frequencies in a mix, and you want to remove them because essentially they're moving the speakers backwards and forwards, and you're getting a distortion, a modulation distortion with the actual physical speaker. So um, the one school of thought with overheads is to trim them right up, take all the lows, all the mids out, and just have the sparkly, spangly top, which sounds fantastic for some mixes. But I'm reliably informed that during the 80s, during the sort of big hair metal kind of resurgence, there were a few studios that were recording quite ambient room mics or overhead mics. And instead of trimming off that low end, they got a lot of their low end from those overhead mics. Try it, go and bring up a mix of yours or bring up a project session and just take the overhead, solo the overheads and crank up the low end. It sounds amazing. Really cool thing to do.
I did a jazz thing a couple of years ago or so, and I used 4 mics. I used 2 room mics and a kick mic and a snare mic. And I would have normally I do the whole high passing thing, but on that one I didn't, because of course I wanted it to be more realistic. And if you just end up with a close mic on the bass drum, it sounds in a way, particularly for a jazz record, less realistic than the sound of the room mics. So in that instance, I didn't cut it. I may not have boosted it, or I may have boosted it kind of a little bit, but I certainly that time didn't, because the genre kind of meant that it would be bad to do it, really, I think.
Yeah, as you say, I mean, it's a lot of this is about, when we were talking about spot mics, they start to sound weirder the closer you get, and certainly the inside of a bass drum sounds very different to the outside. Like I went through a phase of recording all my bass drums with I forget the name now. It was you see them on in taxi ranks. It's a little Shaw mic with a button on it. Do you know the name?
I don't know what you're talking about.
Those taxi rank microphones, and they kind of lean in from the 70s. Little plastic microphone. Excuse me, guys. A little plastic Shaw microphone, and I went through a phase of you can raise them just so they're right in front of the beater, and they sound amazing on bass drums inside a kick drum, or even just outside a drum kit. But if you've got a very dead room, I need to check out the number of those. I'll talk about that in another video maybe one day.
There's tunnels as well. I used to do that a bit. I don't do it so much now, but I used to do the whole tunnel thing on the bass drum.
Yeah, the bass drum tunnel. That's something we're going to cover in the live seminar, so let's not cover that now. Cool. All right. What's next on our list? So the second question that we wanted to address very briefly before we sign off was getting the best sound out of your drums and drummer.
Yes. I think, well, the first point we've written down is get the right drummer, which is kind of obvious, I suppose. I said earlier on that I'm quite a light player, so if you were to book me for a huge, great metal album, then it probably wouldn't go down quite as good as if you booked me for something that kind of suits my playing style. Equally, if you've got a really massive, heavy hitting drummer onto some of the delicate stuff that I play, it probably kind of ruin it. So the first thing is just find the right person, which, you know, it's one of those obvious things, but it makes a huge difference, because if you've got someone beating 7 bales out of their kit and you're trying to get something nice and delicate out of it, whatever you do with mic placement and whatever you do with EQ and clever filtering later, it's still going to sound like someone thumping over a nice delicate song. And equally it works the other way as well. So kind of find the right person to suit. Obviously, if you're working with a band, that's slightly different because your drummer is part of the band. But if you're doing it as a session thing, then make sure you book the right person is the first thing I'd say.
I remember a story where I'd rented out my old studio to a producer, and he was doing a session in there with this band, and they were like an indie band or something, and he was from a completely different genre, very capable guy, but you know his big hits were in a completely different genre, and they sort of walked up to me one day and they said, Russ, I've got some concerns. I said, well, what's your concerns? Oh, well, you know, said producer, he's a lovely bloke, but he's he's made our records sound. I'm going to say I'm going to change the genre, so this is not traceable. He's made our records sound goth. Let's just say goth, 80s goth. For example, it wasn't 80s goth, but I said to them, well, you know, that's what he's famous for. Why did you hire him? Well, you know, we thought he was famous and good, but it's like you need to pick someone who's into your genre, who or at least who's shown interest and capability in the pre-production and so on, and wants to get that sound that you're after specifically. And it's very much the same if you are using session musicians. So
I remember, just slightly off topic, but it's that kind of thing. I remember recording a band a few years ago, and the bass player was atrocious. He just couldn't play in time. He could play all the right notes in all the right order, but in the time, completely different to the rest of the band. And you'd play it back to him, and he'd kind of go, "Yeah, that's a good take." And you think, "No, it's not. It's really not a good take. That's horrendous." And their roadie kind of came with them, and I remember he leant over to me at one point and went, "Yeah, I'll change your name. Yeah, Darren, that bass player. We love him, but he can't play in time." And you think, why is he in the band?
Jonathan Michael Crump, can you put your questions on the YouTube live chat, please? That would be cool, or on the Google Hangout. Zigador's leaving. Bye. Cool. Okay, so yeah, get the right drummer. Well, in tune and in time is my next point. And I'm going to whip this out of its little velvety bag. There's for you on Facebook land. This is the TuneBot, and Dan and I are both big TuneBot users.
Yeah, I should have mine. Really, it's not next to me. I keep mine permanently in my stick bag, but my stick bag's somewhere else.
Not sponsored by them, but yeah, it's an electronic tuner for drums. Normal electronic tuners don't work, and there's a few ways of tuning drums. You can use a drum dial. You can use counting amount of turns methods. You can use a single. These Yamaha have a system where it's just one key that you tighten, and it tightens the whole, like a ring system.
That's good. I found mine, by the way. Here it is. There we go. Hey.
I was going to say maybe they'll send us a free one, but these things last forever, I think, unless you step on them. By the looks of it.
Or hit them if you leave them on the drums.
But yeah, I mean, like I noticed. Excuse me a moment. I'm just going to tweak my camera so it stops doing this autofocus. I noticed a huge difference when I started using the TuneBot. I'd used other drum tuning systems in the past. They were all right, but TuneBot, the note, basically, it looks at the fundamental frequency, and we've talked about it in the past, and there's loads of videos online, but yeah, they're not cheap by any stretch of the imagination. In fact, they're really expensive for what they feel like. Just feels like a little kind of tuner, but they don't make many, so secret weapon. That right, in tune and in time. With making records, I always find that when I mix like electronic records, they're easier to mix. They sound better, quicker, and that's predominantly because they're in time and essentially in tune. When you're doing live drums, you have to be very careful. Sometimes we want to edit the hell out of the drums and make them super rigid. Sometimes we want to make them kind of a little bit looser, a little bit more raw and punchy. But we will talk about in the seminar on the 30th. We'll talk about how to achieve a balance of both of those, how to edit drums or work with your drummer to create what is essentially a super punchy sound, like super punchy timing, but a raw and raucous sound, combinations of these things that you wouldn't think would normally work together.
I think it's about the feel of it, isn't it, really? It's how the drummer feels the music and capturing that.
I always like a drummer who can play to a click and then choose where they push the beats before or after. So You know, a lot of my records I'll do with a live band, but there'll be a click in their ear, and or you know, even like a drum machine, sort of drum machine sample drums, for them to play along to, and it lets them push to and fro around the beat. And make things feel like they're sort of the urgency is increasing, even though the actual tempo is not changing at all. And that's important, that you keep your tempos fairly, you know, as close as possible, especially if the band is inexperienced and can't just do that naturally, because people are dancing to the music or just moving to the music, and then bang, you hit them with a late snare, it jars them. So, you know, in tune and in time music sounds better, because, well, it mixes better because it sounds better, you know. We've talked about the tuning bot. I just wanted to talk very briefly about semiotics, the study of signs, um, which is, you know, in this context, is the signals that we get that tell us what, whether something's of a specific genre, you know, what we, how we are to feel about a particular piece of music or a particular recording, or whatever. And, you know, what is an appropriate drum kit? So as Dan was saying before, you know, if you've got a big old front skinned Ludwig, that might be great for 70s rock. It might be great for, you know, jazz, big band, all these kinds of things. Caddo was talking about big band before on the messages, I believe. So yeah, you know, pick your drum kit and your drummer, as we've said, accordingly. So sometimes, like for metal records, I use like tiny little bass drums, not the kind of bass drum you would think actually, and small toms, because the toms really sing out when they're a lot smaller. For kind of, you know, stoner rock, then you're gonna want a big flappy sort of sound, you know, more room, more overhead, more of that kind of sound. And where you place the drums is important as well, because all of these things give the sign of what kind of genre this is, and how the artist is feeling, and um how the listener is meant to feel.
A
Dan.
small drum kit, by the way, just so everyone can see. There we go.
How do you find that kit then?
How do I find it?
Yeah, I know.
I like it. It's been, to be honest, I've not recorded it myself yet. I've only ever done it in sessions where I've gone to other places, and I've been reliably informed that it's never been sampled, as in resampled. It's always been the sound out of it, because when you find it, for those of you who can't see it properly, and could you hear me resonating through this tom? By the way, it's really weird in my ear. It's a 14-inch bass drum, which is incredibly small and incredibly weird when you first start playing it. But there is obviously some low tones in there, and when you find them and pull them out, it actually becomes quite a large kit. So yes, that is. I just thought I'd show us. Really, there we go.
It's a nice little kit. I've been in a room with it, and it's very tasty. So, you know, we're kind of coming to a close on this. Just one more point, really, about making the artist or the performer. I won't say artist, because, you know, sometimes they are. Well, yeah, they're artists, I guess. Sometimes they're the session drummer. Sometimes they are, um, you know, a member of the band and so on. But making them feel comfortable is really important. I do a lot of work with different lighting scenarios, or just hanging out with the band for, you know, weeks in the run up, going to the rehearsal room, so they don't get that red light syndrome. As soon as record is pressed, it all goes to pieces, we'll say. And that's just like, it's an interpersonal thing. It's something to do with making them feel comfortable, making them feel happy, so they can really focus in. You know, maybe they need a break, maybe they need to go outside, maybe they need to run around the block. I've done that with bands before. Maybe they need to go to the park for half an hour and then come back and smash that take.
I've kicked them out into the Cheshire countryside before.
Yeah. So for you who are coming on the 30th, we'll talk about more about that in a minute. But Orchard Studios is set in an orchard. There's a lake.
I've eaten so many apples the last few weeks. It's unbelievable.
It's a beautiful place. Absolutely beautiful place. Cool. So I think we're about wrapping up the sort of predefined parts that we wanted to talk about. So I'm just going to read some questions. Okay, Lorenzo Gabriel. If you pan the toms to different from the position they have on the overheads, don't you have a sort of two different sounds? I can hear a kind of toms playing simultaneously in two stereo positions. Yes, yes, absolutely. But normally, well, it depends on your level of spot mics to overheads, doesn't it? Really, if you've got loads of overheads, then yeah, you're gonna want you're gonna want to kind of keep them similar. But if you pull the overheads right down and then you filter them so it's just spangly, sharp cymbals, then you've got more leeway onto where to pan them. But you know, if you think about a drum kit, when you're using stereo or pseudo stereo miking techniques, the drum kit isn't full width. So depending on how the mix engineer approaches that, they may choose to keep the drums close together, or they may choose to spread them apart so the whole soundstage is taken up by the overheads or the stereo rooms, or even by the toms, you know, something like that, where you've got a tom that's just totally huge. Depends on what kind of music it is. There's a really cool tool in Mixbus, which is to do with phase alignment, or you can manually just move your tom hits or move your overheads so they are in time, because phase is essentially an extension of time. So they're in time with where the overheads hit. It'll be milliseconds, a couple of milliseconds movement, but it will block them in a little bit more. Not something I do often because I don't really have that problem once the other stuff's in the tracks. You know, it depends how sparse the track is, doesn't it? Do you ever have that problem, Dan?
No, I mean, I tend to when I come to mic it, I do drummer's perspective or audience perspective and kind of decide that. Because obviously, if you look at a drum kit, then the floor. If you look at a drum kit, then generally, if it's a right-handed drummer, your floor tom will be on the left. But as a drummer, your floor tom, as a right-handed drummer, your floor tom is on your right. So what I tend to do when I decide how I'm gonna, which perspective I'm going to use, and then I spend a lot of time making sure and doubly making sure that I've got overhead left hats or overhead right floor tom, and then I'll also write on my tom and on my hi-hat I'll write either left or right, so I've kind of got a double check that I know where I'm panning everything, which is what I do.
Cool. I hope that helps. Lorenzo, wicked. Nigel Jobson has asked where he can buy spangly sharp cymbals. Well, Nigel, not from Zildjian. You can get them.
I'll find you some from Impression. I'll get you some.
Anyone who knows Nigel Jobson, he is the editor of the wonderful Resolution magazine, which obviously I'm going to plug because I write for it. And a thoroughly nice bloke with some amazing recording credits to his name. Yeah, nice one, Nigel. Yeah, any cymbals are good.
I've got a sparkly drum kit.
Well, that's an interesting one actually, because I've seen people put ball bearings in, you know, in between hi-hats, just to kind of get, it was a punk thing, I think. So you could play them like at half speed, and they would sound like they were.
There's you can get a thing that goes on your hi-hat, and it's like a ring, a bit like a tambourine, and a very thin tambourine with just the jangles on it. And I remember getting one not that long ago, took it to a session and went to the producer, look at this is great. And they went, no, that's not going on the record.
I quite like those jingle rings they're called, aren't they?
That's what it's called, yeah.
Or Percussion Plus, or do Impression do any?
They don't, but I have been talking to them about rivets, because I used to play a cymbal with rivets in it. I know it's a slightly different thing, but you can get them done. They're kind of working on it.
I played with a drummer in a band who had a pearl jingle ring, and actually we bought it for him for a gift. And well, let's just say I think it was counterfeit, because every session, well, the pearl sticker eventually came off, but every session he'd be hitting the drums, and the little, what are these called, little tambourine things would drop off the bottom.
Jingles, they're called jingles.
The jingles would drop off the bottom. Cool. All right. Any other questions? Frank says hello. Quick question. Best way to mic with a low ceiling? Oh, drumbrellas. We could talk about drumbrellas and stuff. But yeah, best way to mic with a low ceiling.
Well, I have a low ceiling at Orchard, and we can talk about that on the course. But it's yeah, something to consider, I suppose.
I often use pseudo stereo techniques. So overheads could be, you know, a crossed pair right in the middle of the drum kit, right in front of the drummer there, you know. They could be a splayed Glyn Johns type arrangement, or Recorderman. Recorderman, that's the one, Frank. It was Frank we were talking to, wasn't it? Recorderman is something that I use all the time. In fact, I've got a really special Recorderman technique. More news on that. Well, you'll find that out at the seminar, but more news on that coming up soon, because I was recently featured on a cool podcast, and we talk about my Recorderman technique, modified Recorderman technique that I use. So, you know, my subscribers will probably find out about that in the near future. I can't say too much about it right now, but yeah. Any other questions? Who's your favourite session drummer and why? That comes from a Mr. Jonathan Michael Crump.
Well, obviously Russell's will be me.
Yeah, I actually, genuinely, I do use Dan Logan a lot for session drumming.
Because I'm cheap. I mean, no, not because I'm cheap, because I'm good.
Yeah, that's it. No, he's really good. And you have a couple of kits, don't you? You've got standard kits, but also this kind of strange percussion kit.
Yes.
Involved sorts of cajon, bongo,
yeah,
bongo cajons.
Genuinely not as a plug. If you want to look it up, because there is a bit odd. My website has got it on, which is danieljlogan.net, and that's got pictures of it all around the place.
Yeah, we'll put that in the description as well. If you're watching a replay of this, we'll stick it in. It'll be in the description of the video.
To answer John's question, I've probably got session drummers rather than drummers in bands. Probably it's split between two. Jeff Picaro, who is the only drummer I've known who can do stuff incredibly cleverly and it not detract from the music, as in kind of it sounds like he's showing off a little bit, but it actually kind of adds to the music. And then there's another guy called Roy Martin, who is a big influence on my playing as well.
My favourite has to be Matt Chamberlain. Tori Amos.
Fantastic.
Casey Dreesen as well. He played with Casey Dreesen, who's an amazing fiddle player, 5-string fiddle player from well, he lives in Barcelona now, I think, but he's from the States, and just this fantastic bluegrass fiddle player, one of my kind of fiddle heroes. And yeah, Matt Chamberlain, awesome drummer. I've never worked with him. One day, maybe one day, fingers crossed. Cado has actually jumped in and said, if the ceiling is reflective, you could try 2 pencil dynamic mics aimed towards it, like with an ambient setup.
Yeah, I've not tried this yet, but I know people who do it. At Orchard, we've got kind of a double ceiling. We've got kind of a more absorptive part and a more reflective part, and I just kind of move the drums around accordingly to what I think sounds best at the time. But yeah, I haven't used a reflective thing yet, but I do know about it.
Yeah, and I did a record in a studio out in Cheshire, not Dan's studio, totally different vibe. A little while back, studio's run by 5 Seconds of Summer's sound man, John, lovely bloke. Hello, John, if you're watching. And he's worked with all sorts of cool acts. He does a lot of live work, big arena stuff. And it was an old milking barn parlor kind of thing. Now we had a drum kit, and then it must have been, I don't know, good 20 meters away, maybe further, in a different room. I had either a TLM 103 or a U87 pointed at a wall really far away. And I took some drum samples and we did some drum recording and stuff. But we came around to do another track on this record, and the drummer had gone off to like Spain or something. Gone away for a few months, but the singer wanted this extra track, and so I just put this kick and snare drum sample together, just doof, doof, with just this ambient mic, and man, it sounded amazing. So the drummer comes back, he said, "Oh wow, I don't remember playing that, but man, that's the best track on the record, that is." I said, "It's a kick on the one and a snare on the two programmed." So sometimes if you do want to have that like epic sound, maybe bouncing off a wall, what we were talking about, talking to the drummer, making them play something different. I mean, this was obviously programmed, but just to have them, strip things down and not play the cymbals can be a cool thing. So Frank, maybe maybe you could get your drummer to play less, or play less cymbal, do less cymbal work, or deaden the cymbals with some moon gels. That might be a cool thing to do as well. Look up Drumbrella as well. That's pretty cool. Eric Valentine's studio, and he has this big robotic kind of umbrella.
I think there's more than one, isn't there? I've seen another one, I think, somewhere else. I'm not sure whether they're weird looking things though.
Like a big absorbent pyramid. Cool. Have we got any other questions? A mic clipped on ashtray with my hi-hat stand.
What?
I'm telling stories. Let's just have a quick look at the old Facebook feed and see if there are any more questions. No questions. Okay, cool. So I guess we should wrap it up there because it's been like an hour. So if you have enjoyed what you've been listening to, we're doing a drum recording seminar, and it's based on my normal drum recording seminar where I talk about all the techniques and theories that I use everywhere from big London studios like Abbey Road to Grammy award-winning studios to little industrial unit studios, to home recording, to location recording, to big festival stages, to small festival stages and dive bar club stages. All the principles that I use are all effectively the same. So you can come and learn my theory behind drum miking and how to do it. Get some hands-on, get your hands on some cool new microphones with lasers on them as well.
Yeah.
Lasers on the microphones.
Always good with like, oh, where is that? I've moved it somewhere. I've got it.
It's the folks at Aston are helping us out with this, and they're putting their name behind, or supporting our session. Let's put it that way. So yeah, if you do want to come along to that, you'll get all of my tips, but also you're going to get Dan Logan's tips and tricks and stuff, and we'll just spend a day hanging out in Orchard Studios, drinking coffee and eating, and yeah, maybe eat some apples from the orchard.
Yeah, if there's any left, I might have had them all by then. But
record a professional session drummer. You'll get to take home some of your drum sample recordings, so you can take them and compare them with your stuff at your home studios or your whatever studio you work in. Yeah, and it's all just great fun. They're always really cool sessions when I've done them in the past. It's been a little while since I've done a live seminar because we've been doing a lot on the internet, which is more accessible for people, but there's nothing to substitute getting your hands on a mic, running the cables, moving the mic stands around, and just working with a real live drummer. And then you can take that knowledge away, and you might be working with startup bands, you might be working with just your own band, but it's it's nice to see how it's done, and then you can kind of
you know what, it's actually quite handy as if you are a drummer and not necessarily an engineer, but knowing what's going as a drummer, knowing what's going on the other side of the glass is very important. So and learning about it'll be a good course basically for drummers as well. That's what I'm trying to say.
Yeah. So drummers, come along. Cool. All right. If you want to sign up, just give me a Facebook message or get yourself over to recordingstudiomasterclass.co.uk. I'll put the link in the description, and yeah, there's a page on here. I'm just going to share it. 1 second. Here we go. You should now be able to see. Hey, you should be able to see my website here, recordingstudiomasterclass.co.uk. So if you go over to drum recording here, and here's all the info. There's me prattling on about stuff. Here's Dan's kit, actually. It's really cool, interesting kit. Free memory stick. Yeah, just fill in the form to apply. We've got an early bird special pricing of 100 for the day. But if you have stuck it out till this point, I'm back here. If you've stuck it out, and I know that a few of you are here, and there's a few of you on YouTube, and there's a few of you on Facebook. If you have stuck it out, we are going to give you another £20 off. So it takes it down to £80, which is kind of affordable for students. It's going to be a great day. If you want to get the discount, just mention that you heard in the video, and we'll give you another 20 quid off. Cool. All righty. Well, it's been an absolute pleasure as always. Thanks for having us virtually at Orchard Studios, Dan.
Yes, thank you. Thank you everyone for joining in and asking questions and getting involved. And hopefully we will both see you here in the flesh on the 30th.
Absolutely. Happy recording. I will see you next time.